The only time I ever heard my husband Douglas beg was on a Wednesday morning in November, 6 minutes past 9, while freezing rain tapped against our kitchen window in Ottawa. He stood barefoot on the tile floor, phone pressed to his ear, saying please over and over to someone who clearly wasn't listening. Please check again. Please, there has to be an error. His voice cracked on the word error, and I set down my tea because in 41 years of marriage, Douglas Langford had never once cracked. Not when his mother died. Not when our son was in that car accident at 17. Not when the recession nearly flattened his company. He simply did not break. But that morning, something broke him, and I sat there at our kitchen table, watching it happen, feeling a strange stillness settle into my chest. Not panic. Not confusion. Peace. Because unlike Douglas, I already knew exactly what that phone call was about. I had known for months. I just never imagined how completely his world would shatter when the truth finally surfaced. If you've ever been treated like you couldn't possibly understand something that was right in front of you the whole time, this story will feel familiar. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories with real lessons. And before we go on, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I'm always moved by how far these stories reach. My name is Helen Langford. For most of my adult life, the people closest to me believed I didn't understand money. That belief wasn't accidental. My husband built it like a wall, brick by brick, year after year, until even our children couldn't see past it. When I met Douglas in the spring of 1982, I was 26 and working as a junior accountant at a lumber supply company in Pembroke, Ontario. I wasn't glamorous, I didn't come from money, but I was precise. I noticed when numbers didn't add up. My mother used to say I could smell a wrong decimal from across the room, and she wasn't entirely joking. Douglas was 30, broad-shouldered, impossibly confident, the kind of man who shook your hand and made you feel like the most important person he'd met all week. He ran a small residential construction outfit. 4 employees, 2 trucks, and enough ambition to fill a stadium. I admired that. I admired him. We married 14 months later. The early years were honest. We talked about everything. I managed the household accounts, helped with his company's books on weekends, even caught a billing error once that saved him nearly $8,000. He kissed me on the forehead that night and said, "What would I do without you?" I believed he meant it. Our son Keith arrived in 1986. Our daughter Janelle came 2 years after. Life got busy. Douglas's company grew. 1 subdivision became 3. Government contracts started appearing. By the mid-90s, Langford Construction was one of the most recognized names in the Ottawa Valley. The more successful he became, the quieter I became. Not by choice, by erosion. It started small. A dinner party in 1997. Someone asked about interest rates. Before I could answer, Douglas laughed and patted my shoulder. "Helen's talents are in the kitchen, not the spreadsheet," everyone chuckled. I chuckled too, because that's what you did. You laughed along and told yourself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was practice. He was practicing a story about me, and every time someone believed it, the story got stronger. By the time Keith finished university and Janelle moved to Vancouver, the narrative was set in stone. Douglas handles the money. Helen handles the house. End of discussion. Even Keith absorbed it. One Thanksgiving, I mentioned that a particular mutual fund seemed overweighted in energy stocks. Keith smiled politely, then turned to his father. "What do you think, Dad?" The sting of that moment has never fully faded, not because Keith meant harm, because he genuinely believed his father knew better. Douglas had spent 20 years teaching him to. Janelle was different. She watched more than she spoke. She noticed things. But she lived 3,000 kilometers away, and distance makes it easy to miss what's happening inside someone else's house. As the company expanded, Douglas became increasingly secretive. Financial statements stopped appearing on the desk. Tax documents vanished into his office. When I asked questions, his answers shrank. "Everything's handled, Helen." That phrase became a wall. I heard it so often that eventually I stopped knocking, but I never stopped listening. There were signs. Late-night phone calls that sent him into the garage. Business trips to Toronto and Montreal that seemed to multiply without explanation. A second phone that appeared in his coat pocket one winter and was never discussed. I didn't confront him. Confrontation requires evidence, and evidence requires patience. So I waited, and I watched. The first real crack appeared on a Wednesday afternoon in March, nearly 8 months before everything collapsed. I was sorting mail when I noticed a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. The envelope was addressed to Douglas, but the return address listed a corporate name, Ridgepoint Capital Holdings. I had never heard of it. Douglas's company operated under a completely different name. I set the letter on his desk and said nothing. That evening, he came home 20 minutes late. I heard him go directly to his office. The door closed. When he emerged for dinner, his face looked tight. Not angry, controlled. The face of a man rearranging his expression before anyone could read it. "Anything interesting in the mail?" I asked. "Just business. Always business. Always the same shield." I smiled and passed him the potatoes. But later that night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, turning that corporate name over in my mind. Ridgepoint Capital Holdings. The word holdings bothered me. It implied assets, structures, layers. The kind of arrangement people build when they want things separated. Hidden. Protected from view. The next morning, while Douglas was at a site meeting, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I only knew the silence had lasted long enough. The Ontario Business Registry is public. Anyone can search it. I typed the name carefully. Ridgepoint Capital Holdings. The result appeared within seconds. Incorporated 18 months earlier. Registered director. Douglas Langford and one other name I'd never seen. Tessa Caldwell. I stared at the screen. Read it again. Then a third time. Tessa Caldwell. The name meant nothing to me. No one Douglas had ever mentioned. No business partner I'd met at any event, any dinner, any company gathering. I wrote the name on a piece of paper and slid it into my wallet. Then I kept searching. 3 hours later, I had found almost nothing concrete. But I'd found enough small oddities to keep me worried. References to accounts I didn't recognize. A mailing address that didn't match any Langford construction property. A registration date that coincided almost exactly with the beginning of Douglas's unexplained trips to Toronto. Each detail alone was meaningless. Together they formed a shape I couldn't yet identify. But I could feel it. The way you feel a storm building before the sky changes color. I needed someone I could trust. Someone outside my family. Someone who understood how money moves and how people hide it. For the first time in years, I thought about Marlene Cho. Marlene and I had worked together at the lumber company in Pembroke, back before marriage and children reshaped our lives. She'd gone on to become a forensic accountant, then a financial attorney. We'd lost touch gradually, the way women do when life pulls in different directions. But I'd always respected her mind. Sharp, methodical, unimpressed by excuses. I found her firm's website that same afternoon. Her office was in downtown Ottawa, less than 40 minutes away. I saved the number but didn't call. Not yet. I needed more before I was ready to say the words out loud. Over the following weeks, I became someone I didn't fully recognize. Outwardly, nothing changed. I cooked. I gardened. I attended Keith's daughter's ballet recital. I smiled at Douglas across the dinner table every evening. But privately, quietly, I began examining every financial document I could access. Household records, insurance policies, property tax statements, my own retirement accounts. That last search is the one that changed everything. I logged into my RRSP provider on a Tuesday afternoon. The balance looked normal at first glance. Then I noticed a transaction from 7 months earlier. A withdrawal authorization I hadn't made. The amount was significant. Nearly $90,000, moved into an account I didn't recognize. My hands went cold. I scrolled further. Found another transaction. Then another. Each one authorized with what appeared to be my signature. Each one transferring funds to entities connected to names I'd never seen. I printed every page. Then I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time, listening to the house breathe around me, trying to understand how the man sleeping upstairs every night had done this without my knowledge. The next morning I called Marlene. She answered on the second ring. Her voice hadn't changed. Direct, warm, no nonsense. "Helen Langford. It's been a lifetime." "I need help, Marlene." Something in my tone must have told her everything. She didn't ask a single casual question. "Come in Thursday, 2 o'clock. Thursday arrived. I sat in Marlene's office for nearly 3 hours. She read every document. She asked careful questions. She took notes in a red notebook that she filled almost entirely. When she finished, she removed her glasses and looked at me the way only old friends can, with absolute honesty. "Helen, this is serious." I nodded. "If these authorizations used your identity without consent, that's not just a marital problem. That's potentially criminal." The word hung in the room like smoke. "How bad could it get?" I asked. "Depends on what we find. But based on what's here, someone has been using your financial identity to secure obligations you never agreed to. If those obligations fail, creditors could come after you personally." I felt my stomach drop. "My retirement savings, possibly all of it." That night, I served Douglas his favorite roast chicken. He told me about a contract negotiation. He laughed about a supplier who'd sent the wrong grade of lumber. He poured himself a second glass of wine and asked if I'd seen the score of the Senators' game. I watched him and thought, "You have no idea what's coming." The investigation took months. Marlene was meticulous. Every document verified, every transaction traced, every connection mapped. The picture that emerged was devastating. Douglas had created Ridgepoint Capital Holdings as a separate entity to fund real estate investments. On paper, the structure looked legitimate. In practice, it was built on my identity. My name appeared on loan guarantees, account authorizations, and corporate filings I had never signed. The signatures were forged, convincing forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. I knew my own handwriting the way I knew my own face. The curves were close but wrong. Too deliberate, too careful. A real signature has rhythm. These had precision, which is how you know they're fake. The money trail led in several directions, but most roads ended in Toronto. Specifically, they ended near a condominium on King Street West registered to Tessa Caldwell. Marlene found her within days. Tessa was 38. She described herself online as a real estate consultant. Photographs from industry events showed her standing beside Douglas repeatedly. At a gala in 2022, at a development conference in 2023, at a charity auction just 4 months earlier. In every photograph, they stood too close. Not inappropriately, not obviously, just enough for someone who'd been married to the man for 4 decades to recognize something that didn't belong. The condominium itself was purchased 18 months ago. The down payment traced back through 2 holding companies before arriving at an account funded partially by my retirement savings. $12,000 of my money had helped buy an apartment I'd never seen, for a woman I'd never met, in a city my husband claimed to visit only for business. I didn't cry when I found out. I thought I would. Instead, I felt something settle inside me, something hard and clear, like ice forming on a lake. Not anger exactly. Resolve. Then came the part that nearly destroyed me. I had suspected Keith might do some small things. The way he stiffened when Toronto was mentioned. The way he avoided my eyes when Douglas discussed travel plans. The way he deflected my questions with practiced ease. One rainy evening in September, I invited him to dinner at a quiet restaurant near Byward Market. He arrived looking exhausted. We ordered soup and bread and talked about nothing important for 20 minutes. Thence I set down my spoon. "Keith, I know about Ridgepoint Capital." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "I know about the forged signatures. I know about Tessa Caldwell. I know about my retirement accounts." He didn't deny it. That was the worst part. He didn't even try. "How long?" I asked. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "About a year. A year. 12 months of family dinners, phone calls, birthday cards, and Christmas gatherings. 12 months of looking me in the eye and saying nothing. He told me it was temporary," Keith said. "He told me nobody would get hurt. And you believed him." I wanted to. I understood that. I hated it, but I understood it. Because wanting to believe someone you love is the most human impulse there is. It's also, sometimes, the most dangerous. Then I asked the question I'd been dreading. "Did he pay you?" Keith closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. $30,000. He said it was a performance bonus through the company. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. My own sons, paid to keep quiet about my own betrayal. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The restaurant hummed around us. People laughed at other tables. Life continued. But something between us had shifted permanently. Not broken beyond repair, but cracked in a way that would always be visible. When I got home, Douglas was watching hockey in the living room. He smiled when I walked in. Good dinner with Keith? Lovely, I said. He turned back to the screen. I went upstairs and locked the bathroom door and sat on the edge of the tub and pressed my hands against my face until the shaking stopped. The confrontation came 3 weeks later. Not because I planned the timing, because Douglas's desperation made him careless. The financial pressure had been mounting. Banks were asking questions. A line of credit had been frozen. Business partners were growing nervous. I could see the stress carving new lines into his face, though he still performed normalcy every evening with the dedication of a stage actor. One Friday night, he walked into the living room, where I was reading, and said, without preamble, "Have you been talking to someone about our finances?" I closed my book. Yes. The directness stunned him. He'd expected denial. Who? Marlene Cho, fear flickered across his face. Just a flash, but I caught it. You had no right, he said. To protect myself? To go behind my back? I almost laughed. The irony was breathtaking. This man, who had forged my signature, drained my retirement savings, funded another woman's apartment with my money, and paid our son to stay silent, was accusing me of going behind his back. I reached into the folder beside my chair. Slowly, I placed documents on the coffee table. One by one, the corporate registration, the forged signatures, the loan guarantees, the retirement account transfers, the property records for King Street West. Douglas watched each page land like a man watching his house burn. What is this? His voice had gone hollow. You know exactly what it is. Silence. I know about Ridgepoint, I said. I know about the signatures. I know my retirement savings were used as collateral for loans I never authorized. And I know about Tessa Caldwell. That last name hit him hardest. His jaw locked. His breathing changed. The secret he'd guarded most carefully was no longer a secret. You don't understand the full picture, he said. There it was. The phrase. The same phrase he'd used for 41 years to shut me out. You don't understand. Helen doesn't understand finances. Helen doesn't understand business. Helen doesn't understand. Then explain it, I said. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because there was no explanation. Not one that could survive being spoken aloud. I stood up. For the first time in our marriage, we faced each other as equals. I'm not the woman you told everyone I was, Douglas, as I never was. He stared at me, and I watched something collapse behind his eyes. Not remorse, not yet. Recognition. The recognition that the story he'd spent decades telling about me had never been true, and that the person he'd underestimated most was the one who'd been paying attention all along. He left the room without another word. His office door slammed shut. The house went quiet. I reached into my pocket, stopped the recording on my phone, and saved the file. 37 minutes of audio. Every word preserved. Marlene had advised me to document any confrontation. Now I understood why. The months that followed were the hardest and the clearest of my life. Marlene guided me through every step: financial disclosures, legal proceedings, asset protections. The evidence was thorough, organized, undeniable. Every forged signature documented, every unauthorized transfer traced, every connection mapped. Douglas's business didn't collapse entirely. Much of Langford construction was legitimate, built on real work by honest employees. But the hidden structures crumbled. Ridgepoint Capital was dissolved. The loans secured with my identity were challenged. My retirement accounts, though damaged, were partially recovered. Tessa Caldwell disappeared from Douglas's life almost immediately after the financial problems became public. That surprised no one. Relationships built on someone else's money rarely survive when the money stops flowing. Keith struggled the most. The guilt consumed him for months. One afternoon, he sat with me on my front porch. I'd moved by then, a small house near Almonte backing onto the Mississippi River, and he said, I keep thinking about all those dinners where I watched Dad make jokes about you not understanding money. And I laughed. I actually laughed. You didn't know. I should have. You taught me to read a bank statement when I was 14. Mom, I should have known you understood everything. That admission meant more to me than any apology. Janelle flew in from Vancouver 3 times that year. She was fierce, protective, practical. She helped me find the house in Almonte. She sat beside me during difficult meetings. She called every single day. One evening, over video chat, she said something I've carried with me since. Mom, you spent 40 years making everyone else comfortable. It's your turn now. She was right. It was. The house by the river became my sanctuary. Small, warm, surrounded by maples that turned impossible colors every October. I woke each morning to the sound of water moving over rocks. I drank my tea on the porch. I read books I'd been meaning to read for decades. I breathed. 6 months after moving, I volunteered at the local community center. A women's group was meeting weekly to discuss financial planning. Most of the women were my age or older, widows, retirees, women who'd spent their lives letting someone else manage the money. The fear in that room was palpable, the same fear I'd once felt. I started leading sessions, nothing formal, just practical knowledge. How to read a statement, how to spot unauthorized transactions, how to protect your identity, how to ask questions without apologizing for asking. The group grew. 6 women became 15. 15 became 30. Some brought notebooks. Some brought tears. All of them brought courage, because learning to trust yourself with money at 65 or 70 takes a particular kind of bravery that younger people rarely appreciate. One afternoon, a woman named Faze stayed after class. She was 73, soft-spoken, recently widowed. She held my hand and said, "I wish I'd learned this 30 years ago." I squeezed her hand back. "So do I. That's why we're here now." A year after the separation, a letter arrived at my new address. Handwritten. Douglas's handwriting, which I would recognize anywhere. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. The letter was short. No excuses, no justifications, no attempts to rewrite history, just acknowledgement. He admitted what he'd done. He admitted the harm, and he apologized not only for the money, not only for Tessa, but for the thing that cut deepest. For spending decades making me feel small. For teaching our children that my voice didn't matter. For turning my competence into a joke and my silence into permission. I read it twice. Then I folded it and placed it in a drawer, not hidden, not displayed, just stored. Because I didn't need the apology anymore. That was the strange truth. Months earlier, it would have meant everything. Now it meant something, but it no longer determined my healing. My healing belonged to me. It had stopped depending on Douglas the moment I stopped waiting for him to see me clearly and started seeing myself. People sometimes ask what the greatest victory was. Was it saving my retirement? Was it exposing the truth? Was it watching Douglas face consequences? No, the greatest victory was quieter than any of those things. It was remembering that I had always understood numbers, that I had always been capable, that the woman Douglas described to the world for 41 years, the sweet wife who couldn't balance a checkbook, had never existed. She was a story he told to keep himself safe, and I had let him tell it for far too long. The most valuable thing I recovered wasn't in any bank account. It was my own voice, and unlike the accounts Douglas lost, no one can ever freeze that again. Sometimes the most dangerous lie isn't the one someone tells about money. It's the one they tell about you. And sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do isn't fight back loudly. It's pay attention quietly, trust what she sees, and refuse to disappear. If my story touched you, I'd love to hear yours. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? What would you have done? Leave a comment below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe and join our community. Thank you for being here with me.